And this is my presentation for our project for Gaming 639. And so the topic that I chose was about esports and how this segment is growing and should be one that the hotel and gaming marketers take a strong look at to help bring in new customers, to their properties. So here's our agenda. First, we're going to talk about why should we care about esports. Next, we'll talk about the demographics of esports and the growth in the industries over the last few years. After that, we'll talk about non-traditional advertising and how we reach those esports viewers and gamers, since this is a category where traditional advertising doesn't work for them. After that, we'll talk about how sports betting and the growth of sports betting will tie into esports and how both of them can definitely help each other as both of them grows. And then finally, we'll talk about on-site activations and how that can help properties, get esports players and viewers to their properties, and then some closing notes. So let's get started. So why should we care about esports? So on the slide here, I have two graphs from different sources that shed some light on why we should care. The first one on the left is from a company called Activate, and that they publish insights into tech and media companies. The graph shows sports viewers that are between the ages of 18 and 34. And of those sports viewers, 62% of them watched some form of esports in 2017 when this study was done. That is the demographic that advertisers want very much. And as you can see by the graph, that's more than golf, that's more than tennis, that's more than hockey for what these 18 to 34 people are watching. The graph on the right is from a company called Newzoo. They put out an annual report on global esports every year, and then this basically shows the audience growth year over year over the last couple of years. So as you can see, in 2016, the total number of people that watched esports was 281 million. That grew in 2017, 19%. And then in 2018, that number rose all the way to 380 million. So the last 3 years, we've seen double-digit, growth year over year. And then if you look at 2021, Newzoo has projected that the viewership will continue to increase forward to what they project as 550 million viewers. So we can see that esports is growing upwards growth in a key demographic to advertisers, as well as what our hotels, casinos, and properties, what they want, what they need these groups on properties. So this is a slide from a company called CBRE Global Gaming. This shows the annual percentage on the Las Vegas Strip of total revenue from each of the major groupings from 1990 to 2018. You can see on the graph that the gaming revenue, which is the green bars, it has fallen from being the dominant category in 1990 to not so much in the 2000s and from the last decade. Gaming revenue was 57.8% of total revenue as percentage on the Las Vegas Strip to 1990 to only being 34.3% in 2018. We know that gaming is available in almost every state in the U.S., so if someone just wanted to gamble, there's some form of Indian casinos or other casinos probably within an hour or two of people that want to gamble. So they don't have to just drive to Las Vegas like they would years ago. They can pretty much take their car or it's whatever. They have options that are closer to them. It's also to note that hotel properties have shifted its priorities over this time. Instead of just giving away hotel rooms and food and beverage so people would just come gamble, we're now looking at these items to generate revenue by themselves. So instead of just like, hey, we'll give you the room, we'll basically give you everything free as long as you're willing to gamble X amount of dollars, like it was, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now instead of doing that, now with gaming being no longer, the big dog for what properties are looking for, now rooms are drawing revenue, F&B is drawing revenue, entertainment and retail are drawing revenue. So now they're all driving their own revenue sources instead of just gaming itself. Now, what would this have to do with esports? Well, one main popularity of esports is that they do live events in convention areas and ballrooms across the world. And when you think of these events, they're basically considered mini conventions, and that they check the same boxes as what a convention would. So the attendees would come, they would stay a couple days, they would pay for things like room, food and beverage, retail, entertainment. The only one category that probably wouldn't see as much for esports as you would see for conventions is gaming, because there's enough of the esports players that are not of legal gaming age. So that would be probably the one big difference. But this is a way for properties that help their entertainment calendars if they have space available to host the sporting event, especially during a weekend that things might be happening. You can get 2-3 days if you hold some of these bigger tournaments. We can see a graph from Newzoo and Yahoo that shows esports revenue from 2012 to projected revenue in 2022. And you can see in 2012, esports revenue was 130 US dollars in millions, all the way to 2019, where it's projected to be almost 1.1 billion dollars US. And then you can see 3 years later, that's supposed to jump all the way to almost 1.8 billion dollars. So from 2012, so basically a full decade, you can see from 130 to pretty much almost 1.8 billion dollars. So now that we've talked about revenue and why should we care, let's talk about the demographics. As you can see, this first graph on the left is from Nielsen, and it shows us some of the demographics for U.S. esports fans aged 13 to 40. We can see that 75% of esports fans are male, with 25% of them female. And these fans spend about 3 hours a week watching or participating in esports, and then also about another 7.5 hours weekly playing video games. The key one is this bottom right one, where you see the average age of the U.S. esports fan is about 25. But then you also see in those bright red boxes that 75% of U.S. esports fans fall into that millennial category, that 18 to 24 and then 25 to 34. So the very important demo of that hotel and gaming property says this is our next wave of customers. And you also see Gen Z right behind that, 13 to 17 with 15%. So, you know, esports, basically they're younger and this is where they are, but this is obviously a very key demo. You see on the graph on the right, it shows the number of hours spent watching esports videos worldwide from 2012 to 2018. In 2012, the number of hours was about 1.3 billion hours watched. And then you can see all the way to 2018, that number is skyrocketed to 6.6 billion hours of time spent watching esports video worldwide. I mean, just think how much that content is, 6.6 billion hours. And what an advertising message could be just a tiny, tiny fraction to that. We've discussed a few times during our class about millennials aren't coming to casinos to gamble. Why aren't they coming? Well, we can see that millennials are flocking to esports, and so this is one way a gaming or hotel property could try to attract millennials to their property by, you know, partnering up in the esports world. And we'll get some ideas, you know, as we talk about this more and more. So let's talk about non-traditional advertising. A study was done by the McCarthy Group in 2018. And they concluded that 84% of millennials that were interviewed responded that they did not like traditional advertising, as well as that they didn't even trust it. So not only that they didn't like it, they didn't even trust the messages they were giving, so they were tuning it out. We also see that millennials are not watching TV as much as previous generations have. Deloitte conducted a study that said millennials ages 22 to 35, that 88% of them subscribe to internet video, while only 51% of them subscribe to pay TV. And then you can see Gen Z ages 14 to 21, where 80% subscribe to internet video and 57% subscribe to pay TV. So you can see just where these millennials, where they're spending their time. You know, most of them cutting, you know, they've cut the cord, they're watching internet video, they're streaming, they're not watching pay TV. One last note from a survey done by a company called Defy was that 85% of millennials that responded said that they regularly watch things on YouTube. So this is where they're spending their time, 85% watching things on YouTube. So we can see from the data that traditional advertising, like advertising on TV shows or commercials, billboards, magazines, would not be anywhere near effective to the new generation than it was for the current and previous generations. So for esports, how can companies attempt to advertise to the groups that watch esports? So, if traditional methods aren't working, how can we reach the esport customer? Well, let's discuss a few options. The first one here isn't really an option, but is a key point before looking at the other ones. Whatever company that decides they want to look at this esports, we need to understand the esports customer that they're going after. And when you think of esports, it's kind of this one huge umbrella. But underneath that umbrella, there's smaller communities based on the game. So for Game A has a community, Game B has a community, Game C has a community. And even though they're all kind of similar, they all potentially might have different wants and needs based on, you know, the games they're playing, the ages, and so forth. There are many different game types and games out there, so obviously we know each group can be different from the other. It doesn't all fit into a one-size-fits-all box, so understanding the customer and their wants and needs will definitely be the first key way to understand advertising to them. So the first idea would be to advertise on the right channels. These channels would be YouTube, as we talked about earlier, but also Twitch and other streaming sites. Twitch is one of the biggest streaming sites, around the world. They report that the number of unique daily viewers to its site is 15 million per day, and that the number of monthly users is about 140 million per day. Twitch also notes that the average user spends 95 minutes per day on average watching streams on Twitch, and that the United States accounts for over 20% of the web traffic to the site daily. So just think about that for 1 second. 95 minutes per day on average watching streams on Twitch. It's a lot of time watching esports. Our second method would be to potentially start an esports team or sponsor a current one. As esports has grown, more teams wear custom jerseys for when they play, like what you would see athletes wear, in soccer, in the NFL, in the NBA, Major League Baseball, and so forth. These jerseys contain logos for companies so that any promotional materials or coverage of the team would show the logo. I've got two pictures here to the right of jerseys of esports team, and you can see in the upper picture that the Volkswagen logo is easily visible, and in the bottom logo you can see the Monster Energy logo, as well as they've got a couple others. Our third method would be to potentially sponsor current esports influencers that stream and play on Twitch or YouTube. Instead of a team, these would be just one individual. Not all esports are on teams. Some of them just stream just so they play like on their own. They're not a part of any teams. They're not doing big tournaments, but they are streaming while they play. It would basically be similar to sponsoring an influencer that is on Instagram or Twitter. There would be opportunities for logo placements, video ads, partnerships that can be used to market to the followers and viewers of the influencer. And then finally, the last method would be to create and/or host esports tournaments on properties. As I mentioned earlier, that big esports events can be seen similar to conventions in that they last multiple days, and people will travel from around the country and sometimes from around the world to attend them in person. And sometimes you might see all these people that are coming from around the world that these aren't countries we potentially might market to anywhere else. So we're getting our brand out to people that might not find our brand anywhere else. So in March of 2018, the Luxor here in Las Vegas opened the first esports arena in the Las Vegas Strip in a partnership with Allied Esports Entertainment. It's got gaming center, a broadcast center. It's got plenty of areas so people can come watch or play their favorite esports. They do things like boot camps, trainings, just a way for the community to come together, play, watch, hang out as a social aspect. One interesting note on their earnings call to talk about quarter 3 2019 earnings, Frank Ng, the CEO of Allied Esports Entertainment, said that in-person revenue was up 17% in the third quarter. And he attributed that increase to the HyperX Esports Arena in Las Vegas, because this is basically their crown jewel, their biggest one they have going. So you see in Vegas, esports has a permanent home, not just like if you were going to build something in a ballroom or a convention area. So now let's talk about sports betting. So in May of 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a federal law that was enacted in 1992 that would enable U.S. states to legalize gambling in their state. Previously, the only state that sports betting was legal was in Nevada. So if you wanted to make a sports bet, you either had to travel to Nevada or find an illegal bookie to take your bet. So not many great options. So with that law struck down, multiple states have raced to allow sports betting in their state. As you can see on the map, currently 13 states that are in the green offer some form of sports betting with their state currently. And we also have another 5 states that are in the yellow that they have legislation that has passed, and it's just, it takes time to get things up and running. So ideally, those states in the yellow would hopefully be up and running either by the end of this year or sometime in 2020. So that's 18 states that will have some form of legalized sports betting by the end of next year. But that doesn't include that many other states have some type of bills or legislations that are in their, state legislature to potentially legalize, sports betting. California is one for sure, where they're talking about potentially a bill on the market in 2020 to be able to legalize sports betting. New Jersey was the first to go live in June of 2018 after more than just Nevada was legalized sports betting, and they've had over $4 billion in wagers placed since then. So currently, esports betting is legal in both Nevada and New Jersey, as well as you can make bets online in New Jersey for esports. However, that's not up and running yet in Nevada. Online betting is not as big as it is in New Jersey. The chart on the left shows the number of events that esports have grown with over the past few years. In 2015, there was around 4,700 events, and that has grown steadily to 2019, where it is expected that over 9,200 esports events will happen during the calendar year. And to kind of put that in a little bit of perspective, the NFL only has about 530 games each year that a person could make a wager on. Now, while not all 9,200 events would be something that a legal wager could be placed on, it does show that the scale at which esports could happen from betting wise, as long as more states start to legalize it. So it might not be 9,200, it might be 1,000 or so, or just depending on whatever big events there are. But the scale is there to be able to offer lots of events for betting purposes. And then one other kind of thing to talk about on the stats to the right, though, the one that says 60% of U.S. esports fans use fantasy betting sites. Hardcore viewers are 3 times likelier than casual fans. So a lot of intersect, a lot of cross, from the betting, to the fantasy and esports viewers. Now, when we think about esports and sports betting, there's a few options for someone to make a sports bet. You can bet on a single match within a tournament for who will win that match. You can also bet on who would be the winner of the tournament before it starts. So like how somebody might bet on a team to win the World Series before the season starts. It would be the same thing. Instead of potentially betting on a team, you might be betting on a player or so forth. And then the last option would be in-match betting, similar to how it works for other major sports. And I think that's where a lot of the potential will be, is where now, instead of just making a bet and watching it, now while the esports event is going on, you can make bets while it's happening to be able to, potentially, if one person you think is doing well, you can bet the other side, vice versa. But the ability now, you're going to be interacting and connecting during the event via sports betting, where before you really didn't have that option. There's space available to host esports events and competitions. I came across a report put out by the Ehlers and Krejcik Gaming Company that talks about the intersections of esports and gaming. And in their report, they envisioned how an esports event could integrate with the property and how it can benefit from that. And so in their report, they had this kind of picture, a graph that I thought was a really great representation. So I put it in my presentation, and I want to talk about this a little further because I think this is a great way to show like how esports and properties can come together and be able to use everything at their disposal to be able to satisfy their guests and open up good revenue streams. So as you can see in the bottom left, it shows 8 potential touch points that an esport event could interact with the casino's customers and get them engaged or entertained. Of those 8 points, it doesn't even bring up the fact about hotel rooms or food and beverages that properties can also offer esports gamers or attendees to also boost revenue and or engagement. When you look at the touch points that are discussed, we can see that some of them are for viewing parties, to watch major events or competitions either live or on TV. Those would be numbers 1 and numbers 3 here on the graph. We also have ones that have space for our in-house customers to either learn or compete on properties. That would be number 2, the esports camp, or number 4, the small competition for prizes. We can also tie it into casino with skill-based slot machines, as well as having sportsbook odds available on esports matches. That would be numbers 5 and number 6 on here. And then finally, also using areas like the pool or entertainment areas for either after parties, pre-parties, during things, or other events that can tie everything together. You see number 7 here as well. So all of these groupings and categories. And then also number 8, having area for retail for esports to help sell some of those retail items that we may have on site for the event we're hosting, or potentially from the teams that we're sponsoring or the influencers that we're sponsoring as well. So tying everything all together. So as you look at this example, you can see how we can tie esports into many different areas of the hotel and casino. This gives us numerous areas for which we can market and or advertise to hotel or casino customers that are in that 18 to 34 demographic that we talked about earlier. This would be great to get them their property to enjoy esports along with any other options that the property offers. So just a way to get them there, get them involved, get them to enjoy. Like we talked about the convention idea earlier, and this kind of shows you how we can integrate the resources that a property has to better leverage the esports player, consumer, or watcher. There's one last way to tie this together, and it's something that's being discussed at HyperX at the Luxor, in that the ability to allow players or attendees to earn M Life points or credits for the money that they're spending on all these certain esports things. Currently, this is not happening at the Luxor, but Luxor has mentioned that they're looking into that for the future. And not only will that be beneficial to the gamers or attendees because now they're getting credit for all that money they're spending, it's also great for the properties because now we're adding all that information to our databases and we're now learning more and more about what esports players or viewers or attendees are spending their money on when they're coming to our properties. And now once we've got all that information, we can help better advertise and market to them. And it's pretty much, a win-win for everybody altogether. So kind of some final thoughts. I want to wrap together all of the talking points I've talked about earlier. So we've seen esports is growing rapidly in terms of potential revenue and viewership. The one chart showed we're almost 570 million people in the esports audience by 2021. The demographic is a highly sought after by hotel, casino marketers, and advertisers. 75% of esports players are in that 18 to 35 millennial category. And this is what we're looking at for as we start seeing more and more of the baby boomers move out of the hotel and gaming category and more of these millennials move in. There are many options for non-traditional advertising that can be used to go after the esports player. Advertising on internet streaming sites, YouTube, Twitch, hosting events on property, sponsoring teams or sponsoring influencers, some of the options that are available that are non-traditional, but that would directly be seen by our esports players. Sports betting can tie into esports to become more relevant in more states in the future. And I think it's great that kind of they're both moving forward at the same time, so you can see as more and more properties are writing sports books and they're writing regulations and procedures and policies, that we can better get esports, within their sports books to a thing that makes sense for not only the sports book, but for also the esports better. And then as we showed on the last slide, the ability to tie on property events to a multitude of areas, on a hotel or casino, like entertainment or retail or hotel, or just space in general, so that we can host these big events, and they're basically, like a convention, like small entertainment events, so that now we have more ways to get these customers to our properties, to entertain them, to get them to keep coming back and back, and enjoy our brand and help grow whatever our property is. So these are pretty much some final thoughts on why I think esports is something that should be taken very seriously by our current marketers or advertisers going forward. It checks all of the key boxes for, the millennials, for growth. These are the people that are, going to start spending their money, and we hope we get them to spend money on our property. So thanks everybody for paying attention to my presentation here.